Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, October 29th, 2019. We're moving on in October. It's almost Halloween. Should we do? I guess I should do the show in costume. We'll do the show disguised as a television show that's having technical difficulties and the video has gone out. How about that? We could write that down. We'll use that for later on. It's time for another show now. Daily Coast Radio is live now. Bill knows, and he's in Portland, Maine. So if he knows, then the rest of you might know as well. Big doings in the impeachment hearings today and for the rest of the week. And Kagro X gets us up to speed. That's good. I should tell that guy so that he can come in here and tell us what's going on. It is a big week. The testimony, I guess the blockbuster testimony about which everyone is talking on Twitter this morning, I think doesn't happen until Thursday, but the attacks were scheduled for Tuesday, Monday night, really. So we're already underway, getting a head start on these things. One of the more unbelievable aspects of this is that the Republicans apparently are under instruction to attack the witness, I guess is the one who's scheduled for Thursday deposition. And I'll get the names and addresses and telephone numbers if necessary for all of the people involved here. But really one of the more remarkable developments, the witness that we're talking about having the deposition for on Thursday is a Army, I guess still active duty, Army Lieutenant Colonel by the last name of Vindman. And we'll get his particulars and discuss him, I'm sure, at some point later on in the show. I know we'll be doing it because I was going to say, oh, well, Greg will probably have it. But it's Tuesday. Greg has it. He's just not here to give it to us. We'll be talking about him again on Wednesday, I'm sure. But do I have the background, or I must have it put away here somewhere? It's just that it's under such a flood of information. There we are. Okay, it was really, it's just piling on here. But the Republicans, to no one's surprise, I guess, are on the attack. The New York Times told us what we needed to know about this person, this new witness. Quite a record, really. Sterling is what it looks like to the outside observer, anyway, at this rate. Army officer who hears Trump's Ukraine call reported concerns. Now, I understand he says he's not the original whistleblower, but apparently this causes some serious confusion for Donald Trump, who is out there pretending like he's never faced charges in court before. I think we all know he's been there before. I saw him tweeting this morning, why are we talking to more witnesses? Just read the transcript. It tells you what I did. I'm perfect. I'm perfect call, etc. Now we are, of course, talking to witnesses who interpreted the phone call. And, of course, the old complaint. I guess this means the old complaint is dead. We'll give you a little legalese background here, just for fun, since we've spent so much time talking about hearsay and what hearsay really is and the hearsay rule and the many exceptions to the hearsay rule. A lot of what happens in crime these days happens outside of court. And, of course, not necessarily in criminal context, but also civil cases also have their own hearsay rules. But having defined for you, giving you the driest possible law school definition the other day of hearsay, which they teach you in law school, is an out-of-court statement offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. That is, in other words, it's being offered for its own sake. You're supposed to hear this statement and believe that it's true and that it proves what it sounds like it's proving, and that's problematic. And the reason that they disfavor hearsay is they would rather have someone come into court and say, this is what happened, or have other direct evidence of what was said or what happened brought out in court, as opposed to someone's testimony about what happened elsewhere without any way of proving it other than you said that it happened. Anyway, you'll recall when they were crying terribly about it all being hearsay, the theory was that the whistleblower, in the whistleblower report, admits that they didn't hear the call, they heard secondhand from others about the content of the call. But of course, the whistleblower report was also about the larger context in which the call took place, which has now become much clearer, both through the whistleblower report and other people's testimony, Sondland's testimony, Taylor's testimony. Everyone has cleared up that this is something that's been going on for a long time with Ukraine. And we've certainly cleared it up, I hope, or at least we've given you the impression that there's much more by reading you many more articles. Anyway, the big complaint was that if the whistleblower didn't hear the call themselves, then their testimony about the call is hearsay, which is sort of true. And, of course, the way you cure that problem is by having other people who did hear the call or who even were involved with the call coming and testifying directly to its context and its content, which is what's happening now. And Donald Trump is complaining bitterly about that. Just read the transcript. The transcript itself, until, of course, it's designated as official and then could perhaps get by, if this were a court of law, which it isn't, it could get by a hearsay objection by establishing itself as an official document or transcript of an official proceeding or something of that nature. But, of course, the transcript isn't a transcript, so we have some problem with that. So one of the other ways you can get around the problem of what the whistleblower heard being hearsay is bring witnesses to the court or whatever venue it is you're operating in who were on the call and have them testify directly as to what they heard. Give their present sense interpretation of what happened, for instance, is one of the other hearsay exceptions. It's still the case that what they heard said was said out of court, and they are offering it to as proof that these things were said on the call, and that is still hearsay, but it is also the present sense impression of what happened, which is another one of the hearsay exceptions. And you have to kind of spend some time, I guess, sitting in class to understand why that's so interesting, but it's basically witnesses are absolutely permitted to and encouraged to tell us what they thought of what was going on. What sense did they get at that time when they were present when the conversation was taking place? That's a valuable impression and one worth having for the court. That's why they have witnesses to anything. You know, I saw him shoot him. Well, that was your present sense impression anyway of what happened. You heard a gunfire, you saw it in somebody's hand, a bullet went into somebody else, or rather a round. We don't want to say a bullet because that includes the casing, etc., etc. Not all of that went into the victim. Anyway, so that, for instance, is what Vindman offers. He actually was on the call. So was Sondland, or at least he understood I don't know, was he on the call? But he understood the context of the call. He helped set up the call. All these people that Trump is complaining about, why aren't you just reading the transcript? These people are here to verify both that the transcript is accurate and that what the whistleblower said about what they heard about the call is largely true as well, and the same impression is held by several other people. That's what you do in court when you're trying to build a case against someone. And, all right, he's just griping and complaining. Anyway, the Army officer who heard Trump's Ukraine call reported concerns. The top Ukraine expert at the White House will tell impeachment investigators he twice reported concerns about President Trump's pressure tactics on Ukraine, acting out of a sense of duty. We can even use a sound effect for that. He was acting right out of a sense of duty. He's not even an acting person in the White House. He's just, this is how he was working, and we say it was brilliant. Acting brilliant. You see, right. Thank you for reporting it twice, and that's how many thank yous he got too. All right, so here he is, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander S. Vindman. He's in a photo here and identified by the caption. It says he is the top, as a matter of fact, Ukraine expert on the National Security Council. Here he is in a photo posted on Twitter by the American Embassy in Kiev in May. I don't know if all of that is necessary, but it's in the caption, so we thought we'd offer it to you. By the way, he is a lieutenant colonel in the Army and an expert on the national security on Ukraine on the National Security Council. And otherwise, except for the fact that he's testifying to the detriment, I guess, of Donald Trump, Trump would otherwise be pleased with him. If you have some question about how he got there without being a thorough Trump loyalist, well, for one thing, Trump doesn't know what he's doing and doesn't really control the staffing of things because he just waves his hand at whatever list people bring him. And this guy was otherwise eminently qualified. But also, he's from Central Casting. You wouldn't think so necessarily to look at him. He looks like, well, he's from Central Casting as bureaucrats go, particularly those on assignment from the armed forces. But here's how I think of it. If you take a good look at him, and you think back to the movie, which I guess is now an old movie, qualifies as an old movie, A Few Good Men, and you think of, remember the lieutenant colonel in that movie, the one who was, of course, in counterintelligence and top aide to Colonel Jessup, famously portrayed in the movie, as you know, right, by Jack Nicholson. So he's what's the name of the actor who portrayed him? It's like, what is it, JT? Is it Ryan, or do I have it wrong? Anyway, Markinson, Colonel Markinson, Matthew Markinson, who helps him out and is a chief aide to him, looks an awful lot like him. So we'll even say he passes the central casting test. And that's an important part of, I don't know, a complete breakfast, I guess. That's usually what people follow that up with. Danny Hakim is the writer of the New York Times piece I introduced to you 10 minutes ago and still haven't read. Here we go. A White House national security official who is a decorated Iraq war veteran plans to tell House impeachment investigators on Tuesday. Oh, I thought that was Thursday. So now, no wonder everybody's talking about it here on Tuesday. All right, well, I forget what's happening on Thursday, but something else important. So he's going to tell House impeachment investigators today that he heard President Trump appeal to Ukraine's president to investigate one of his leading political rivals, a request the aide considered so damaging. How damaging was it? So damaging to American interests that he reported it to a superior. And that was just one of two things he's reported. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander S. Vindman of the Army, the top Ukraine expert on the National Security Council, twice registered internal objections about how Mr. Trump and his inner circle were treating Ukraine out of what he called a sense of duty. He plans to tell the inquiry, according to a draft of his opening statement obtained by the New York Times. I have seen it. It's a solid statement. I mean, it's damning, to be sure, but it doesn't make for that, it's not like riveting reading, so we probably won't read it on the air. It's not that long, I think 6 pages. About half of it is on his background, which is now becoming important now that he's under attack by Republicans. Anyway, he will be the first White House official to testify who listened in on the July 25th phone call between Mr. Trump and President Volodymyr Zelensky. I regret that we have dropped the second Y in the Zelensky spelling, although I never used it when I had to type it. I just found it interesting, and I wonder if that. Are there any Ukraine experts who can communicate with us and tell us why? How do you pronounce that? Is it different from Zelensky? Are we just anglicizing that, or was it Zelenskia, or something like that? At the end, I don't know. I don't speak Ukrainian, and I suspect there may not be a Ukrainian speaker, native Ukrainian speaker, in our audience, but you never know. If we do have one, they're likely insulted by what's going on today, which we'll get to next. Anyway, so he heard the call, and the call, of course, is at the center of the impeachment inquiry in which Mr. Trump asked Mr. Zelensky to investigate former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr. He was Barack Obama's vice president. I don't know if you know that. We'll go on and on with the New York Times backgrounder. All right, ready? I did not think it was proper to demand that a foreign government investigate a U.S. citizen. That's another good point. And I was worried about the implications for the U.S. government's support of Ukraine, Colonel Vindman said in his statement, or I guess in his written statement. He will say that today out loud. I realized that if Ukraine pursued an investigation into the Bidens and Burisma, it would likely be interpreted as a partisan play, which would undoubtedly result in Ukraine losing the bipartisan support it has thus far maintained. The general gist of his statement, having read it myself as a backgrounder, is, of course, he is, as it turns out, Ukrainian-American by birth, anyway. Ukrainian, born in the old Soviet Union, emigrated in, I think they said 1979 or so, as a 3-year-old, so really raised here in the United States, but is an issue area expert, and I guess has maintained sentimental ties, anyway, possibly to Ukraine, or may just be, issue area expert. This is my work, and I'm sure he came to that work because his parents probably spoke Russian and Ukrainian to him at home, and so it was very easy for him to understand intelligence materials that came in those original languages, etc., etc. Anyway, it appears from his backgrounder, or from the background he provided in his written statement, that he's just essentially saying it's very important to the United States as a matter of national security that Ukraine survive as an independent entity, that it be aided by the United States and Western allies in its attempts to westernize, and that all requires being able to maintain its independence and territorial integrity and political integrity separate from overwhelming Russian influence, etc., etc., and that to the extent that the United States is interested in a peaceful and westernized and corruption-free, if they ever get there, but a Ukraine which is fully equipped to effectively fight corruption so that it might westernize, although why they think Western civilization is corruption-free, I don't know, but it's an ideal. To the extent that that's important, then it should also be important that if the United States is going to offer assistance consistently to Ukraine, it's going to have bipartisan support. The worry that he's expressing here is that if the Ukrainian government were seen as knuckling under to the Trump administration by providing evidence, fake or otherwise, that has no public policy value to the United States, but instead all of its value lies in its partisan usage by Trump in his re-election efforts, that could cost Ukraine necessary democratic support for its further backing in United States foreign policy, and that would be a disaster. Or, if it went the other way for whatever reason. If it becomes a political football, Ukraine is going to lose its best shot at continued support for its own independence and its own struggles against Russia. That appears to be what it was that was motivating Vindman in all of this. In order to do my job the best I can and implement American national security policy with respect to Ukraine the best I can, this needs to happen, and they're screwing it up by doing this. So, Burisma Holdings, of course, is the energy company where Hunter Biden served on the board while his father was vice president. And as Vindman notes in his statement, this would all undermine U.S. national security, referring to Trump's comments on the call. The colonel, a Ukrainian-born immigrant who received a Purple Heart after being wounded in Iraq by a roadside bomb, and whose statement is full of references to duty and patriotism, could be a more difficult witness to dismiss than his civilian counterparts. That, of course, is wishful thinking. Republicans have already dismissed him and are already saying, in fact, that he's a spy and a double agent. I mean, it's as bad as it gets. Anybody who was fooled by the idea that the Republicans would find it difficult to attack a decorated Army veteran who had won a Purple Heart in Iraq or anywhere, forgets that it is the Republican track record that when it becomes necessary for their political survival, they happily attack veterans, active duty servicemen, Purple Heart winners. The record is replete. They did so with John Kerry and his Purple Heart. They did so with the Iraq War Gold Star family, whose name now escapes me. And of course, the whole point of bringing him to our attention was so that we wouldn't forget his name. And here I have done that anyway. But the cast of characters you have to keep track of when it comes to being dissed by Donald Trump is just enormous. And hopefully you can forgive me and you know exactly who I'm talking about. All right. So anyway, you should never have believed in that. And to the extent that you did, you either write for the New York Times or are just not really paying attention to what's going on in America, or both. And I'm really sorry. And I hope you're waking up now listening to the show. I am a patriot, Colonel Vindman plans to tell the investigators, and it is my sacred duty and honor to advance and defend our country irrespective of party or politics. Not that the other side would believe that. He was to be interviewed privately on Tuesday by the House Intelligence, Foreign Affairs, and Oversight and Reform Committees in defiance of a White House edict not to cooperate with the impeachment inquiry. The colonel, who was represented by Michael Volkov, a former federal prosecutor, declined to comment for this article. In his testimony, Colonel Vindman plans to say that he is not the whistleblower who initially reported Mr. Trump's pressure campaign on Ukraine, but he will provide an account that corroborates and fleshes out crucial elements in that complaint, which prompted Democrats to open their impeachment investigation. I did convey certain concerns internally to national security officials in accordance with my decades of experience and training, sense of duty, and obligation to operate within the chain of command, he plans to say. He will testify that he watched with alarm as, quote, outside influencers began pushing a, quote, false narrative about Ukraine that was counter to the consensus view of American national security officials and harmful to the United States interests. According to documents reviewed by the Times on the eve of his congressional testimony yesterday, Colonel Vindman was concerned as he discovered that Rudolph W. Giuliani, Rudy Kaludi to you and me, the president's personal lawyer, was leading an effort to prod Kiev to investigate Mr. Biden's son and to discredit efforts to investigate Mr. Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, and his business dealings in Ukraine. His account strongly suggests that he may have been among the aides the whistleblower referred to in his complaint when he wrote that White House officials had recounted the conversation between Mr. Trump and Mr. Zelensky to him and were deeply disturbed by what had transpired in the phone call. Colonel Vindman did not interact directly with the president, but was present for a series of conversations that shed light on his pressure campaign on Ukraine. He will also testify that he confronted Gordon Sondland, the United States ambassador to the European Union, the day the envoy spoke in a White House meeting with Ukrainian officials about, quote, Ukraine delivering specific investigations in order to secure the meeting with the president, unquote. I'm trying to decide as I'm reading this whether or not it really is in our interest to read the statement. Most of the substance of the statement is restated here, I think, in the article. I don't know, but I guess what's missing is the context in which he explains exactly why certain things were concerning. But I don't know, I think we can actually put that together given what we've read in the past. By the way, before I move on from this point, the previous point where we find out that Vindman did not directly interact with the president but was present for a series of conversations, back into pocket here, I think I put away a tweet that made a very interesting and valuable point, although it's going to take some combing through in order to find it. Although maybe it's in Twitter in my feed of tweets and replies instead. But just so I can give proper credit, somebody, as soon as I dig it up here, was quite, really on the money in pointing out, that's actually quite remarkable. Here we are. Ned Price is the tweeter here. What are we talking about? Oh, a special assistant and National Security Council assistant, a spokesperson at that, for Barack Obama, previously in the CIA, I am told by his Twitter bio. But he makes the excellent point that among the remarkable elements of Lieutenant Colonel Vindman's statement almost comes across as an aside. The NSC official responsible for Ukraine, right, the top Ukraine official on the National Security Council, never communicated with President Trump. The president instead sought advice from Giuliani and $1 million donor. So again, really his ignorance is largely his own fault. I mean, definitely his own making. He's an ignorant guy, to be sure, but he intentionally remains ignorant by refusing to talk with issue area experts about anything. He only wants to hear from people on his team who are looking to advance his interests, whether they know anything about Ukraine or not. And there's really no reason in the world to believe that Sondland or Giuliani know anything accurate at all about Ukraine. The only exposure they have to it is Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, who are criminals, or at least criminal suspects, I should say. They are allegedly criminals, but they really are. Everybody knows it. Anyway, that comes up later in the discussion as well. Just when we get around to filling in the blanks about what's been happening to the reputation of poor Colonel Vindman anyway this morning. I don't know whether it's sinking in. I hope not. I doubt it, given the sources it's coming from. Anyway, we'll take a 2-minute break and return to this subject and fill in more of the blanks about what's been happening with Vindman and what Republicans are trying to do to undermine the testimony he hasn't even given yet later on. After this, we'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now, everyone, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. We're ready to roll one more time as soon as I attempt to clear the throat once again. Okay, so where we left off was... Yes, first of all, Colonel Vindman will testify, and apparently he has actually arrived to give his testimony. I am reliably informed by Twitter, which is always correct. So here we are. He had the confrontation with Sondland, right, on the day that Sondland spoke with Ukrainian officials about Ukraine delivering specific investigations in order to secure the meeting with the president. Even as he expressed alarm about the pressure campaign, the colonel and other officials worked to keep the United States' relationship with Ukraine on track. And I just gave us a great impression of the unknowns, the unsung heroes, I suppose, if they turn out to be heroes, inside the National Security Council. And I say unsung heroes mostly because they're not necessarily, I mean, maybe they're heroes, maybe they'll turn out to be heroes, but they're certainly unsung. The anonymous people who worked behind the scenes in all this, whose entire lives were wrapped up in their mission desks, essentially. All they care about in life is making sure that the region or country to which they're assigned doesn't blow up on their watch. And they're doing anything they can to keep things on track. But you get a sense from a lot of these witnesses how much they were willing to put up with, how much crap they were willing to absorb from the president and his team of outside and inside idiots that they've brought in to try to run quote-unquote policy, if they think ultimately they can, by absorbing the impact of this crap and by sitting quietly through stupidity and vindictiveness, if they think at the other end they can quietly come out with a policy win and keep things on track for their part of the world, for their portfolio, they're willing to do it. And that's really something, because not a lot of us would be willing to sit by in that. Anyway, even as he expressed alarm about the pressure campaign, the colonel and other officials worked to keep the United States relationship with Ukraine on track. That's what I'm talking about here. At the direction of his superiors at the National Security Council, including John Bolton, then the National Security Advisor, Colonel Vindman drafted a memorandum in mid-August that sought to restart security aid that was being withheld from Ukraine. Perhaps you've heard of it. But Mr. Trump refused to sign it, according to documents reviewed by the Times, and he drafted a letter in May congratulating Mr. Zelensky on his inauguration, but Mr. Trump did not sign that either, according to the documents. Colonel Vindman was concerned after he learned that the White House Budget Office had taken the unusual step of withholding the $391 million package of security assistance for Ukraine that had been approved by Congress, the unusual and largely illegal step. At least one previous witness has testified that Mr. Trump directed that the aid be frozen until he could secure a commitment from Mr. Zelensky to announce an investigation of the Bidens. While Colonel Vindman's concerns were shared by a number of other officials, some of whom have already testified, he was in a unique position. Because he emigrated from Ukraine along with his family when he was a child and is fluent in Ukrainian and Russian, Ukrainian officials sought advice from him about how to deal with Mr. Giuliani, though they typically communicated in English. On 2 occasions, the colonel brought his concerns to John Eisenberg, the top lawyer at the National Security Council. The first came on July 10th. That day, senior American officials met with senior Ukrainian officials at the White House in a stormy meeting in which Mr. Bolton is said to have had a tense exchange with Mr. Sondland after the ambassador raised the matter of investigations he wanted Ukraine to undertake. That meeting has been described in previous testimony in the impeachment inquiry, and I think I read something last night where related to the Vindman testimony that said that Bolton cut that meeting short at some point because he was astonished and embarrassed that Sondland was directly pressing for a quid pro quo in the meeting with the Ukrainians, and Bolton was aghast that, that a crime was being committed and exposed here by somebody who would cause a major league problem for the Trump administration if it got out. And it was all he could do to try to draw the meeting to a close, and even that didn't really work. Anyway, moving on here. Here comes Vindman arriving in uniform. There's a nice photo of him out there, decorated with his Purple Heart medal on as well. So that'll be fun when Republicans, I guess they'll get a chance at tearing him down because, of course, the testimony is behind closed doors today. But when they get around to those public hearings, that's going to be real fun. And probably if there are some vicious attacks in the proceedings today, Democrats on the committee should consider seeking whatever clearance might be necessary to read the remarks made by Republicans today back into the public record later, especially if they later try to soften their attacks on Vindman in the public testimony if he appears again. All right. Anyway, at a debriefing later that day, and remember here we're talking about July 10th, when senior American officials met with senior Ukrainian officials at the White House, and wherein Sondland brought up directly, basically, can we have this quid pro quo? Sure. Hold on. Well, we'll consider it. The Ukrainians didn't actually agree to it. They were aghast as well. But he's pressing them directly for these investigations and tying it directly to all the things that the Ukrainians are there to negotiate for. At a debriefing later that day, attended by the colonel, Mr. Sondland again urged Ukrainian officials to help with investigations into Mr. Trump's political rivals. Ambassador Sondland emphasized the importance that Ukraine deliver the investigations into the 2016 election, the Bidens, and Burisma, Colonel Vindman said in his draft statement. I stated to Ambassador Sondland that his statements were inappropriate and that the request to investigate Biden and his son had nothing to do with national security and that such investigations were not something the NSC was going to get involved in or push, he added. So at a minimum, he says, you're not getting any help from us about that. One, we think it's a serious national security concern and a violation of national security. Two, don't look to the NSC to back you up on this. You're all on your own if you want to try this, plus I'm reporting you. The colonel's account echoed the testimony of Fiona Hill, one of his superiors, who has previously testified behind closed doors that she and Mr. Bolton were angered by efforts to politicize the interactions with Ukraine. The colonel said that after his confrontation with Mr. Sondland, Dr. Hill then entered the room and asserted to Ambassador Sondland that his statements were inappropriate. So it's not just some staffer saying it, it's the chief staffer. Ms. Hill, the former, and I believe she's a doctor, yeah, right. Ms. Hill, that's what they say in the Times for some reason, the former senior director for European and Russian Affairs, also reported the incident to Mr. Eisenberg. Right? We remember that from her testimony at the direction of Bolton. The colonel went to Mr. Eisenberg a couple weeks later after the president's call with Mr. Zelensky, so July 10th and July 25th or thereafter. This time, the colonel was accompanied by his identical twin brother. How do you like that? Yevgeny, who is a lawyer on the National Security Council. That is really something. Wonder how often that happens. The picture painted by Colonel Vindman's testimony has been echoed by several other senior officials, including William Taylor, or rather William B. Taylor, Jr., the top American diplomat in Ukraine, who testified last week that multiple senior administration officials had told him that the president blocked security aid to Ukraine and would not meet with Mr. Zelensky until he publicly pledged to investigate Mr. Trump's political rivals. While the White House has urged witnesses subpoenaed by Congress not to participate in the impeachment inquiry, failing to comply with a congressional subpoena would be a risky career move for an active duty military officer. That's true, as it is, after all, Congress who approves or disapproves of rank advancements, particularly at that level. They actually take a pretty hard look in the Armed Services Committee at people moving up to lieutenant colonel, colonel, general, etc. And one of the things that they usually pass is pro forma bills with large packages of names being approved for advancement. But the truth is that you want to get promoted as an officer in the Army, you can't have a vast swath of political enemies in the majority anyway. So, he's making, I'm sure, plenty of enemies in the minority. But if we can keep it that way, then there won't be political retribution against his advancement anyway. Okay. As tensions grew over Ukraine policy, the White House appears to have frozen out Colonel Vindman. Since early August, he has been excluded from a number of relevant meetings and events, including a diplomatic trip to 3 countries under his purview: Ukraine, Moldova, and Belarus. So that's how they take care of business in the White House. Exclude the issue area expert from the area that he's an expert in so that he's no longer an expert and we can substitute other people for his judgment. Colonel Vindman said he had reported concerns up his chain of command because he believed he was obligated to do so. On many occasions, I have been told I should express my views and share my concerns with the chain of command and proper authorities. He said, I believe that any good military officer should and would do the same, thus providing his or her best advice to leadership. So that's the conclusion of Danny Hakim's entry here for the New York Times, giving us the background that we need on Vindman, who he is, and what's expected in, or what was written in his written testimony submitted yesterday. We'll see we'll see what happens today in front of the committees. All right. Many other things to get to, including, as I said, the Republican attacks on Vindman and the particularly bitter tack that they're taking. Let's see. So far, I have seen Aaron Rupar doing his usual, gathering up video segments. This one, of course, from Fox and Friends this morning, reporting that Brian Kilmeade, commenting on Vindman, quote, "We also know he was born in the Soviet Union, emigrated with his family, young. He tends to feel simpatico with the Ukraine." He makes the mistake that we sometimes make here, saying the Ukraine. And that's not even the worst of the bunch. There were other attacks launched last night, which I think I actually have around here somewhere. I thought I had grabbed those things, but I know I can find. Well, I know I can find them in the Twitter feed. Anyway, I had retweeted one of Georgia Logothetis' comments on the subject, including her comment that, basically you haven't been paying attention if you don't think that Republicans would be more than willing to attack a Purple Heart winner or a decorated military veteran. They do it all the time. Don't know where you've been if you think that that's the case. But she was also, she had also included in her tweet, there we are, as the way she put it, "No one is really surprised that the party that gleefully donned Purple Heart Band-Aids and cheered attacks on Gold Star families is claiming a decorated war vet is a double agent, right? Pretty predictable move by the scriptwriters, to be honest." She's referring here to the tweet from Andrew Lawrence, Deputy Director of Rapid Response for Media Matters for America, noting last night, "Oh my God, look at the spin they're using right now, actually saying that Vindman is a Ukrainian double agent. This is so freaking bananas." This, I think, comes from Laura Ingram's show last night. And, I guess it would be ridiculous to try to pollute our air with the entirety of even just this segment, a minute and 22 seconds of garbage. But also on the panel, if you play through this thing, I think she has John Yoo, and it looked like, if I saw correctly, that's, what's his name? The guy we all hate. Why am I blanking on his name now? Do they have a chyron so that we can follow along that way and not blank? John Yoo, I knew was there, but Dershowitz, that's right, is sitting there as well. I don't know. So far, it's all John Yoo and Ingram talking, so they don't bring him back. But okay, so Alan Dershowitz, John Yoo, and Laura Ingram. What a panel. But the point of their commentary here is, well, he was born in Ukraine. And I understand the inclination, I guess. It's just that I've mostly resisted it, except when we're talking about Ukrainian American or Ukrainian-born American citizens who are otherwise implicated in serious wrongdoing, like Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman. It's, it's highly improper to simply suggest, well, maybe they really have conflicting loyalties. And so now between these guys and Sean Duffy, did we quote him? Was he, I don't even know if we grabbed that one. That was also probably hanging around somewhere in the, in my, Twitter feed here, and I guess I have to mark all of these things for Pocket as well so that I have an easier time finding them later on for Scott. But somewhere along the line I also saw that Sean Duffy this morning was actually using the phrase, I think, divided loyalties in all of this, which is really rather amazing. And particularly given that for Duffy, the accusation is based on nothing at all beyond the fact that Vindman is born in Ukraine and is Ukrainian American. I mean, that's an extraordinarily troublesome premise for Trump, if logic applies. I mean, if dual loyalties is the accusation because he was born in Ukraine, well, it only gets worse if, for instance, the Ukrainian Americans with whom Rudy Kaludi and Donald Trump himself, Donald Trump Jr. and Mike Pence, according to the photographs, are so closely associated with, you know, it would be a disaster if there were, for instance, several photos circulating on the internet demonstrating the closeness between Trump, Pence, Giuliani, and two Ukrainian Americans with dual loyalties who in fact are currently criminal suspects in federal custody and who were arrested at the airport holding one-way tickets out of the good old USA, as I put it in the tweets this morning. And of course, there are several such photographs. Yes, here we are. We have here the tweet of White House reporter for the Washington Post with a difficult last name to pronounce. It's Toulouse Olorunipa. I'm hoping I've got the emphasis on the right syllable in that one. And I'm not too far off, but excellent note that I was able to build off of, noting that he's the one that caught Sean Duffy on CNN going full dual loyalty in attacking Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. He has an affinity, I think, for the Ukraine. He speaks Ukrainian. And I mean, oh my goodness, he speaks Ukrainian. It's actually a valuable skill, one, for a person born in Ukraine, and two, for a person who's responsible for national security in the White House on Ukraine. It probably would help. But yeah, what a Aaron Rupar, I guess, has got a piece on that too. Got the segment from CNN. Is it last night or was it this morning? I think it's this morning. Sean Duffy on CNN on Army Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. It seems very clear that he is incredibly concerned about Ukrainian defense. That is, of course, because he is the National Security Council officer, the top Ukraine expert on the NSC, and it is a matter of United States national security policy that Ukraine be able to maintain its defense, because they are, of course, fighting against an actual military incursion by Russia. So I'm incredibly concerned about Ukrainian defense too, I guess, by extension, as an American. But Duffy goes on to say, I don't know that he's concerned about American policy. We all have an affinity to our homeland where we came from. He has an affinity for, again, the Ukraine. But again, confusing the issue on purpose, of course. He has a National Security Council concern for the defense of Ukraine. But, you know, just like a Republican, to gloss over that and instead make it about having been born in Ukraine, which is really rather remarkable. Anyway, let's see. So he speaks Ukrainian. That was the other charge. And of course, as you know, Lev Parnas, recently arrested by the federal government on charges of campaign finance fraud. Lev Parnas speaks Ukrainian as well. And in fact, he does it so well that Joe DeGeneva and Victoria Tensing hired him to supposedly translate for Dmytro Firtash, a wanted Ukrainian criminal whose extradition to the United States by the Trump Department of Justice. He is the head of the Trump, the head of the Department of Justice, Donald Trump, unitary executive and all that. They're fighting the Department of Justice on his extradition to Chicago, of all places, which Trump insulted once again yesterday, saying that it was more dangerous than Afghanistan. But you would think that it would be a special interest then of the Trump Justice Department to prosecute crime in Chicago. But of course, no one believes that Trump equates white-collar crime with regular other kinds of collar. I don't know. I mean, it's not really blue-collar crime either. Blue-collar people are working, not just out there committing crimes. What color is your collar if you're involved in crime, street crime in Chicago or anywhere else. Chicago doesn't have its own color coding, does it? Anyway, but Lev Parnas speaks Ukrainian so well, Digenova and Tensing hired him supposedly to translate for Firtash, which is really interesting because, again, Tensing and Digenova, big Trump supporters, but they're overseas fighting against America. That's, I should play the national anthem at this point. We all stand up and salute. They're fighting against the American Department of Justice, Trump's Department of Justice. There's divided loyalties all over the place in this story. And it's important to take note of them, just by way of deflating the idiotic attacks against Vindman. But, all right, it'll all become moot in a few minutes when his testimony ends, or a few hours when his testimony ends, and the damaging stories start to come out, and everybody realizes that none of this garbage has worked. All right, let's see. There are, other aspects of this story and others I thought I might bring up here. CNN did a piece yesterday. We didn't really talk very much about what will become now an iconic photo of the Trump administration. And they certainly intended for it to be an iconic photo of the administration, but it'll end up being ironically iconic, I guess. Trump seems to have gone through some considerable effort in executing the raid that killed Baghdadi, the former ISIS operative. But he seems to have gone through some effort to make sure that he got a Situation Room photo of himself sitting with top officials and top military brass looking stern, because he recalls what became an iconic photo from the Obama administration of Obama and Biden and Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State and other top officials sitting with a few military officials as well in the Situation Room. But a candid photo captured, I guess, by Pete Souza, the White House photographer, that really captured the drama of the moment. I have to say this. Trump's White House photographer is the absolute worst. I mean, it really, I would not be surprised to find out that it was, I'm sure it's a friend of Trump's, but I mean, it might as well just be, iPhone pictures taken by Melania or Barron for that matter, or, Ivanka. Not that their photographic skills are so much worse than anybody else's run-of-the-mill snapshot photos. The point really is that, it's not actually them, I think, and B, the person taking the photos is presumably holds themselves out as a professional photographer, but they are in fact, at best, some sort of wedding photographer that Trump must have used in the past for some event, because all the photos are staged like an unskilled event photographer's hand has been put. I mean, the people stand in rows and turn your shoulder to the camera, and now you look a little closer to the camera. They're just cheesy, stale photos that convey nothing about the inner life of the White House, and that just may be because there is no inner life in the White House. These people are all hollow, and these may be the best photos that they can get. But this is such a staged-looking, stupid photo. And then there was some speculation that it was entirely staged. When Souza himself was taking note, I guess he was really trying to make a point of how badly composed this terrible picture was. And on Sunday tweeted out the photo along with information, which I'm not certain of the provenance of the information, and I guess nobody was able to find any other instance in the reported news that, like Souza claimed, that the raid had begun at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. I guess we're still on daylight time. Are we still on daylight time? I think so. Eastern time, anyway. 3:30 p.m. on Sunday, which I instantly recognized as still being during Trump's golf outing on Sunday, and said, all right, well, he must have been golfing while they launched this raid, which, all things considered, I guess I'd rather have him golfing than trying to, I want you to shoot him in the face. Now shoot him in the left eye, not in the right eye. Trying to call the shots from the White House and interfering in things. He'd already interfered enough, as we learned yesterday, by pulling troops precipitously out of Syria. Anyway, it later turned out, or at least the story was later changed somehow, I don't know how you want to characterize it, to putting the start time of the raid closer to 5 p.m. Eastern time, which of course would have given Trump time to leave the golf course, come home, shower, change into a suit, and sit down in a situation room and have his photo taken. But again, another stupid staged-looking photos. Pete Souza made sure to take a candid shot that said a lot. And as a matter of fact, this is the next piece. Kevin Liptak for CNN. Photos highlight stark differences in Trump and Obama approaches. And I think there's something really valid to be taken from this and from the analysis of the photos. But my alarm has gone off telling us we're nearly into our top of the hour break. So it won't be long before we get back around to telling you what Kevin has to say about these things. But even before we get to the text of his article, it's just immediately apparent the differences between the styles of the photographs and what that says about the person that they choose to be White House photographer. Pete Souza, I think so far, universally acclaimed. I guess there are probably Republicans who think he's a terrible photographer because he photographed Democrats. But the composition of his photos just gives you some feeling for what's going on in the picture. Whereas this picture of Trump in the Situation Room, they could be watching a football game with a bad result. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Nancy Pelosi is now tweeting a response to the same tweet that moved me this morning from Donald Trump. I never did read you the actual tweet from Trump. How many more never-Trumpers will be allowed to testify about a perfectly appropriate phone call when all anyone has to do is read the transcript? I knew people were listening on the call. Why would I say something inappropriate? Which was fine with me, but why so many? And that has nothing to do with anything. But Nancy Pelosi responding here, everybody has read your words on the call. The Ukrainian president asks for military aid to fend off the Russian attack. You say, I want you to do us a favor, though. And then you spend the rest of the call asking for bogus investigations to smear your political opponents. Yeah, pretty much. But of course, we do want to establish that from first-hand testimony, which is what you were demanding after all. And now you're getting it. But of course, that could lead us to the next story, and perhaps after we read about the CNN interpretation of the photographs. But again, Republicans demanding certain direction from or appearing to demand a certain direction from the investigation, mostly just to try and attack the investigation and the investigators itself. And then when they are satisfied by being offered what they're demanding, they say, I never demanded that, and that doesn't make any difference anyway. So you can stop trying to satisfy them, certainly. But Pelosi isn't even doing that. But she makes the excellent point. Look, we all heard what you said. The Russians are the Ukrainians are under attack from the Russians, and you want a favor out of it. Instead of saying, yeah, that's bad, we need to stop the Russians from attacking you. Well, we might be interested in stopping the Russians from attacking you, but what we're really interested in is getting what I need for my election, and you can have what Congress mandated that you get if you do me this extra favor, though. By the way, really, they should have instructed him, just don't say though. That would have cast some real doubt on it, although favor wasn't very smart either, to be sure. Anyway, we'll come back to that in a few minutes. The CNN story I thought was somewhat interesting on the photographs. And without getting into the question of what time did the raid start, it makes a lot more sense, as it turns out, that the raid would have started around 5 or after 5 p.m. Eastern time. If you were doing a nighttime raid in Syria, you'd want it to be, middle of the night. And I think a 3:30 p.m. start time makes it's dark out. Although maybe that's even the most confusing time. I don't know. I don't know what the military thinks about raids like that. Is it better to show up 3 o'clock in the morning local time, or is it better to show up at 9:30 p.m. when it's dark this season of the year in wherever they were in Syria? Because personally, I find it really disorienting after the long summer hours to find it dark at, even 8:30 p.m. around here. It feels like it's the middle of the night, but it's only 8 p.m. and it's kind of disorienting. And I don't know whether that happens for everyone. I don't know whether it's different if you're in ISIS for whatever reason or what have you. But I could see it being just as disorienting attacking at 9:30. But anyway, if you were going to attack in the middle of the night, you would want to wait until it was later in the day. 5 o'clock might have been right. Of course, there's also the possibility, not so far discussed, but I wouldn't put it past anyone, that they wanted to do the raid at 3:30, but they were told, no, you can't do the raid at 3:30. You got to do the raid after the president plays golf because he demands to see it. And I could see that being the case. And I could also see it being the case of the military saying, I'm sure it'll go just as well at 5 o'clock as it would go at 3:30, but it would be nice if the president maybe made this the priority instead of golf. Whatever, we'll never know, except we'll eventually find out. We will know. But anyway, CNN's interpretation of the pictures I thought was interesting, or gave us an opportunity to give you a more interesting interpretation of the pictures in case theirs was boring. The execution and aftermath of the raids that took down Osama bin Laden and Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi were as different as the presidents overseeing them. That makes some sense. But in one area, they converged. Barack Obama and Donald Trump both wanted to watch. How each leader handled the defining moment says as much about their mindset as it does their foreign policy. Before, during, and after the raids that took down the two highly sought terrorists, Obama and Trump adopted divergent approaches and were met with different reactions from the American public. Both recognized, however, the weight the moments carried for their legacy, and both wanted to see it happen. As though you were watching a movie, Trump recalled Sunday after announcing the death of the ISIS leader in graphically detailed terms, which by itself is about as dumb a statement as you could make about something so momentous without getting it wrong. Like actually factually wrong, like saying, I watched a baseball game. That would be wrong. You watched a military raid as though you were watching a movie. Okay, whatever. Obama's comment, I guess, offered right next isn't exactly the most eloquent, but at least it's an adult statement. We were essentially watching what was happening in real time. Obama recounted to CNN in 2016, 5 years after the Navy SEALs took out the 9/11 mastermind, and don't call him a mastermind. Anyway, that's at least a factual statement, and it is it does note the difference between watching a movie and watching a military operation with real life implications. It's easy to understand the impulse, I guess, to watch. Coming in the third year of their presidencies, the raids carried the possibility of vindication and the risk of devastating failure. Looming was the legacy of Jimmy Carter, whose mishandling of a high-stakes foreign policy matter, the Iran hostage crisis, may have cost him a second term. It's a bad way of putting it. It was actually, I guess you could blame him for the mishandling of a high-stakes foreign policy matter, but I think the parallel you were trying to draw was to the rescue operation, which also turned out to have been mishandled, but not necessarily by Jimmy Carter himself. But why they refer to or make the comparison to the entire Iran hostage crisis in its entirety, I don't know. It's just poorly executed there. Obama exercised caution afterward and avoided disclosing details of the raid. Trump was eager to tease the news and laid out much of its particulars himself. And while Obama and his aides were careful to avoid inflaming bin Laden's followers, Trump made a point of coloring Baghdadi's last moments with an emasculating description of, quote, whimpering and crying and screaming all the way. We've since learned, of course, that there's no way that he could have known this. And the best that the Pentagon's generals can offer without getting themselves in trouble is, I don't know where he got that. You know where he got that. He made it up. So there's another episode of How to Interpret a Trumpster comment. Those generals are captured Trumpsters, whether they want to be there or not, and they know they can't get the president in trouble. You know where it came from. He made it up. You can't say it, so fine. And, you could say, well, I don't know for a fact that he made it up. Maybe Pence made it up and told them that. True. Photographs of the two moments capture leaders on edge. They really don't. They capture Obama on edge. They capture Trump looking constipated as usual. He's got the same stupid, vapid, stony look on his face that he puts on when he's trying to take a serious looking picture. That's also his steamy, sexy look. When Melania is splayed out on top of the golden piano in the Trump Tower apartment, he's got that look on his face. He's watching a military operation, he's got that look on his face. Everybody else in the room, by the way, looking bemused, befuddled, downright angry to be there and being used for a prop, whatever. But in the Obama Situation Room photo, everybody's riveted to the screens. Something real is happening. And what's interesting is that in the Trump photo versus the Obama photo. In the Obama photo is taken from an oblique angle, because the group is gathered around the table watching the operation take place on a screen that's directly in front of them. Sousa can't stand in front of the screen and take the picture straight on, as a wedding photographer might want to do. And it actually gives you, again, the feeling that you're in the room. Plus, of course, all the people in the room are A, actually watching something, and B, are genuine human beings and have a emotional reaction to what they're seeing. And you can read it on their faces. The Trump picture, and I don't know the name of the Trump photographer, takes the picture from the perspective of the screen that's supposedly being watched, which is incredible on a number of levels. One, because it's just piss poor photographic composition, as usual. And two, you're blocking the screen. They can't see the thing now. So it's about as staged and fake looking a photo as could possibly be. And is evidence in itself that, that the participants in the photo are not chiefly interested in the military operation itself, but rather the documentation of them looking like they're watching a military operation. They were after a copy of the Obama photo, but didn't bother to copy what made the photo powerful, which was a number of things. One, the oblique angle that gave you a sense that you were in the room watching Obama and the top administration officials watching the events. The composition, the very composition of Trump's photo, prevents you from getting that feeling. Now you just feel like you're in the way of things. Issue number 2, which may or may not be addressed in the article here, is that the central figure of the Obama photo is the military commander who is at the head of the table and at the keyboard, apparently, controlling the video being displayed for everybody. And Obama himself is sitting immediately to the commander's right in a low office chair, just sort of, hunched over and watching and letting the military control the show. Trump, of course, has seated himself at the head of the table in this one, surrounded on either side by top administration officials and military brass. But in this, on the Obama picture, he's almost in a corner here. He's next to Joe Biden and the military commander, and everybody else is sort of crowded around wherever there's space. And Trump has not only put himself at the head of the table, but staged the room such that the table is centered and everybody's around him. And it's just like any Oval Office photo, except messier, because it's happening in a situation room and there's wires all over the place. So, again, the subtext of, or, the message, the semiotics of the photo is Obama is here to watch a military operation. The military is in charge. He's approved it, but he's there watching the outcome. And they're all watching the screen, and you can see them doing that, and the photographer isn't in the way of the screen. The subtext, the semiotics of the Trump photo is, I'm Mr. Important. I'm not even watching the actual event because the camera is in the way of the event, and here are some important military officials sitting with their hands folded, doing nothing, whereas, again, in the Obama photo, the military is actually operating the equipment that allows them to see the event. And they're all viewed watching the event. It's just a terribly done job. So, there we are. The rigid posture and imposing presidential seal stand in contrast. If we, I guess we missed the bottom half of that paragraph we left off on. We said that there were the photographs of the two moments capture leaders on edge. Trump, stone-faced and formal in a suit and necktie, sits at the head of a long Situation Room table surrounded by similarly grave advisors, some in military uniform, some of whom are staring dubiously at the camera, as the raid played out on large screens, which were being blocked by the photographer. The literal and symbolic central figure, Trump projects the sense, or he thinks he does, the sense of authority he has often craved as commander-in-chief. The rigid posture and imposing presidential seal stand in contrast to the photo of Obama, in a polo shirt and windbreaker, leaning forward as his team huddled around laptops as word came from Abbottabad that Geronimo, the code name given bin Laden, maybe not the best choice, had been killed. Obama, slightly off-center with his chair pushed into a corner, is not the eye's natural point of focus. The photos are from different rooms. Okay, that's important. Trump's was taken in the John F. Kennedy Conference Room, the iconic command post famously reproduced in movies and on television shows where presidents are briefed on highly classified missions. Obama was briefed in the lead up to the bin Laden raid from the same head of table position where Trump is shown watching the Baghdadi mission. He sat there as Admiral William McRaven, the Joint Special Operations Commander, narrated the mission from an outpost in Afghanistan. But later, as word came there was a better view to be had down the hallway, he and his team decamped to the smaller conference room where a video feed was played on the general's laptop. It is there the tableau, crowded with others, including a hand-to-mouth Hillary Clinton, was snapped. If both presidents wanted to view the operations they personally ordered that took down their era's most wanted terrorists, there was little else in common in how they handled the high-wire decision and subsequent exaltation of the mission's successes. When he took office, Obama made clear to his first CIA director, Leon Panetta, that finding bin Laden was a priority. 9 months before the raid, Obama was first briefed on the possibility the U.S. had located the terrorist at a compound in Pakistan. But without certainty, Obama was left with a choice. I had been inclined to take the shot fairly early in the discussions, but you had to hold back the decision until you have to make it. And in the end, what I very much appreciated was the degree to which we had an honest debate, Obama told CNN in 2016. It was, in that way, emblematic of presidential decision-making. You're always working with probabilities. Obama spent at least some of the lead-up to the bin Laden mission fine-tuning jokes for that year's White House Correspondents' Dinner, including jabs directed at Trump, whose relentless and racist pursuit of Obama's birth certificate had that week pushed Obama to release the document. He authorized the mission the same week. As a tuxedoed Obama was ribbing an unenthused Trump for his reality show decision-making, "You're fired, Gary Busey." His team was making final preparations for the raid that would launch in a matter of hours. And I suppose then you could say, well, shouldn't he have been at the White House prepping for supervision of the mission rather than doing this? But okay, White House Correspondents' Dinner, at least that's an event that it would cause some puzzlement if the president skipped it, whereas the 250th golf outing, maybe not. Trump, meanwhile, began discussions about possible operations to take out Baghdadi over the past several weeks, as surveillance showed the ISIS leader on a compound near Idlib, I guess, Syria. Idlib, I-D-L-I-B. He was presented with options for a raid on the compound last week and made the decision to go forward. So a much quicker turnaround on the decision, which I guess, Republicans would see as a good thing, whereas Democrats would say the more contemplative process might have been better for bin Laden. The bin Laden raid really was bigger, despite Trump's efforts to insist to everybody that it was really the opposite. And I guess also not only the quick turnaround, but I guess the beforehand prep as well. Plus, of course, the fact that Trump spent time at his press conference insisting that he, too, came into office insisting that there was one top priority, the guy they absolutely had to get. Although, I guess it wouldn't be beyond belief that Trump said, whoever the guy from ISIS is, I don't know his name because nobody does, get him. They go, I want the number one ISIS guy hunted down. He could have done that. But I think he made a big deal of trying to pretend that he wanted that from day one because he had heard that Obama had said that about bin Laden. But it was much easier to believe about bin Laden because bin Laden had been infamous for years before Obama came into office. Not the case with al-Baghdadi. Anyway, on the day of the raid, Trump woke up at Camp David after hosting an anniversary party for his daughter and son-in-law, played golf at his course in Virginia with Senator Lindsey Graham and the commissioner of Major League Baseball, also Ron Johnson, I think, was there for the golf, and returned to the White House around 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The group assembled in the Situation Room 30 minutes later. Unlike Obama, who returned to the White House residence to play cards as the Navy SEAL team flew from Afghanistan to Pakistan, only returning when they were on the ground, Trump remained in the Situation Room for the duration of the mission. Ooh, see, you might give the advantage to Trump there if you thought he had a brain in his head and could have done anything. Oh, well, maybe that's what led him to sit there. I had the feeling that there was something I could do, whereas there really wasn't, and you were better off just letting the military handle things. Asked Sunday to describe the difficult decisions he had made along the way, ready? Trump said, well, just death. There you go. That's the depth of his thinking. I'm sending a large number of brilliant fighters. These are the greatest fighters in the world, he said. And that part is okay. But what was difficult about the decision? I don't know. Things. On Saturday evening, once the U.S. commandos had safely returned from the mission to an as-yet unidentified base, Trump offered a cryptic tweet that something very big has just happened. Shortly afterward, the White House said he'd have a major announcement in the next morning. That was to notify you guys that you have something big this morning, so you won't be out playing golf or tennis or otherwise being indisposed, Trump said later, even though he might have noticed that the White House press corps follows him around wherever he goes. There's dozens of people there. When was the last time he came down to speak to the press, but they were all playing golf or tennis or were otherwise indisposed? Sigh. And of course, little projection, much you won't be away playing golf instead of doing your job. Among his national security advisors, there was a debate over whether it was too soon to claim victory, given a lack of ironclad evidence that it was Baghdadi who died in the mission. Trump, however, was itching to announce the news, and media reports soon emerged on the mission in Syria and its target. Ultimately, Trump was convinced by advisors that announcing Baghdadi's death at 9 a.m. on Sunday at the top of the weekly political broadcasts would generate more attention. It also gave U.S. officials more time to verify the target. Obama's aides also debated whether to announce the bin Laden raid the evening it occurred or the next morning. Almost all advocated for waiting, including Obama, who wanted additional verification it was bin Laden who'd been killed. After McRaven told him one of the SEALs on the mission, who was the same size as bin Laden, lay next to the body to confirm its height, Obama wanted more proof. He told him to get a tape measure. Interesting. Okay. Ultimately, that would be better, and I think you could probably carry a tape measure. Ultimately, news reports began emerging of a U.S. helicopter crash in Pakistan, whose government urged the White House to announce the news. With a few hours' notice, Obama delivered a 9-minute speech announcing the targeted operation in Pakistan but offering few details. Today's achievement is a testament to the greatness of our country and the determination of the American people, he said from the White House Cross Hall with the long red carpet stretching behind him. Ah, yes, I remember the scene. Outside the White House, cheering crowds had gathered. Trump's prepared remarks were of similar length, but wildly divergent in tone, describing Baghdadi as a, quote, sick and depraved man who died running and crying. Trump ended his prepared section bluntly. He died like a dog. He died like a coward. The world is now a much safer place. God bless America. Thank you. He said before taking questions for more than 40 minutes in the White House diplomatic reception room. There were no cheering crowds outside the White House. When Trump attended Game 5 of the World Series that evening, he was booed. You heard a little bit about that yesterday. Among the phone calls Obama placed following the successful bin Laden raid was to his own predecessor, George W. Bush, who was eating soufflés with his wife in Dallas. Well, fine. When word came that Obama was trying to reach him, I bet he's pissed that, they included the soufflés, of all things. Good call, Bush told his successor. After hearing details of the mission that took out the terrorist he'd spent the majority of his presidency chasing. Trump, according to aides, hasn't made a similar call. Hogan Gidley, a White House spokesman, said he, quote, wasn't aware of any communication about the Baghdadi mission between Trump and Obama. A spokesperson for Obama did not comment. Trump offered little conciliation during remarks in Obama's hometown on Monday. He should have been killed years ago, he said of Baghdadi during a speech to police chiefs in Chicago. Another president should have gotten him. So, just nothing dignified or gracious at all about the way he handled it. And I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that. And we'll spend some time discussing how poorly he handled this thing. All right. Let's see. I left this up on Pelosi ostensibly as a reminder of a transition I wanted to make in what we were discussing. And I am not, now I'm not remembering what the hell I meant to transition to. So that was super effective. Let me see if combing through Pocket or Twitter helps me remember this. It was the Pelosi response. Everybody read your words on the call. Ukrainian president asks for the military aid. He says, I want you to do me a favor. Spend the rest of the call. I can't remember what transition we wanted to make in that. And I have to go back and listen. When I go back and listen to the podcast, I'll say, oh, yeah, that was it. Maybe some of you remember. I should have asked you to remember for me, and then Scott would end up texting me what I was meaning to talk about. Maybe you're there and maybe you remember what it was, Scott. Or if any of the rest of you do, KITM hashtag, tweet that thing at me. I can possibly figure out. But, in all likelihood, we're going to get there anyway just by combing through Pocket and finding what I needed to find that way, just chronologically. Okay, well, I guess that means I can close this thing and catch up on current comments instead. Yes. Many of you commenting along the way. Karen, sorry to upset you. Please don't say Trump, sexy, and splayed in the same sentence. I just did it again. That wasn't a good idea. Okay. And let's see. Mike Musson saying, faked wires. None of them are plugged in. That's true. That was the first thing everybody noticed, that all these wires weren't plugged in. Although somebody did say that, that none of them have any laptops open, so there wouldn't be any reason to have the wires plugged in anyway. But you'd think that somebody would have cleaned that crap up at some point, and they just never do that in the Trump White House. Place is going to be trashed when he moves out, I'm sure. All right. Let's see. Another break coming up. Maybe that is 2 minutes long. Might give me an opportunity to try to figure out what the hell it was I meant to move on to if my quick roll through Pocket doesn't do it. But anyway, I know there was at least something that I hinted at yesterday, and I couldn't find the article, and now I remember something about what it looks like in Pocket, about John Solomon, and a little bit more on the background on that guy that I was looking for yesterday and didn't get to. I'll see if I can't peek at that and see whether it makes a reasonable transition. Otherwise, I'll try and figure out what the other transition I wanted to make was and try and cram in as much as I can into the last segment here before exiting for the day and into the craziness of the Vindman testimony and the stories that will no doubt be generated from it. Back in 2 minutes. Hold on. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I did get a text from Scott. He doesn't remember either. Sorry. No reason to be sorry. I didn't. If I had called it out, that would have been a lot more helpful. Last time I called it out and said, somebody remind me. You were able to remind me because I said remind me. I didn't say it this time. So remind me next time to say to remind me next time I need somebody to remind me. I think that actually worked. Yeah, okay. Don't know how you'll be able to do that. It won't work. But, okay. Anyway, I think I may have figured it out. Plus, I found the article on John Solomon, and it occurs to me, though, that maybe the transition to Solomon doesn't make as much sense. Would have made more sense yesterday. And I know you're on the edge of your seats trying to figure out what I learned from ProPublica about Solomon, but I think I may save that. Housekeeping information here. I got to take another day away from the microphone on Friday. Maybe that's a good time, given our sort of Friday tradition, to catch up on one of the characters in the story and some background on it. We'll save that and put that aside and see if I can't put together an all-new pre-recorded podcast for Friday and continue our tradition of discussing the new or peripheral characters as they emerge so that you are up on them for the weekend. And that'll give me a chance, I think, to transition to, I think I might have been thinking of spending some time on some of the other dirty and disreputable tactics being employed by Republicans tangential to the impeachment inquiry that may have stemmed from our discussion of Colonel Vindman's attack, or the attack on him by Republicans. There's a couple of other similar stories circulating out there. One from, over the weekend, I guess, Saturday, the 26th, Greg Miller and Rachel Bade from the Washington Post, writing, in impeachment inquiry, Republican lawmakers ask questions about whistleblower, loyalty to Trump, and conspiracy theories. In the headline, no news that they're into the conspiracy theories or overly concerned with loyalty to Trump. But just to give you an idea of what's actually going on here, Devin Nunes, known leaker, probable traitor, has been spending his time inside these hearings, leading Republicans in trying to insinuate that there's something wrong with the whistleblower personally or the whistleblower's testimony, given the fact, or rather the whistleblower's report, given the fact that the whistleblower has not made themselves known to the public, hasn't come forward and testified. That's a favorite talking point of Trump's. He keeps saying, where's the whistleblower? Where's the whistleblower? It doesn't really matter where the whistleblower is, particularly if you actually believe that the whistleblower's evidence is hearsay. It wouldn't be of any interest to identify the whistleblower or have them testify. After all, what they have to testify to would be irrelevant to you because hearsay. So even though you're wrong about hearsay, yes, now I remember one of the other notes that I wanted to get to, and maybe I've given myself the reminder here. But anyway, they've been sort of trying to hint that the fact that the whistleblower's identity is being shielded is important somehow in undermining his account of what happened. Now, though, that they've gotten closer to identifying the whistleblower, and in fact that some are reporting that Devin Nunes and staff have been trying to leak the whistleblower's name, it seems clear that that the concern there isn't in fact with the accuracy of the report, since that's been corroborated by direct evidence from so many other people. The reality is that they wanted to drag out the whistleblower so that they could identify that person publicly and target them for harassment or possibly violence. So they've moved on to that phase of the game. Greg Miller and Rachel Bade, again, the writers here. Republican lawmakers have used the congressional impeachment inquiry to gather information on a CIA employee who filed a whistleblower complaint, press witnesses on their loyalty to President Trump, and advance conspiratorial claims that Ukraine was involved in the 2016 election, according to current and former officials involved in the proceedings. GOP members and staffers have repeatedly raised the name of a person suspected of filing the whistleblower complaint that exposed Trump's efforts to pressure Ukraine to conduct investigations into his political adversaries, officials said. The Republicans have refrained during hearings from explicitly accusing the individual of filing the explosive complaint, because they don't know, with the U.S. intelligence community's Inspector General 2 months ago, officials said, but the questions have been interpreted as an attempt to unmask the whistleblower, whose identity is shielded under federal law, so they love breaking laws, these guys, said several officials with direct knowledge of the depositions. Republicans appear to be seeking ways to discredit the whistleblower, as well as other witnesses, by trying to dredge up any information they can, one official said. They don't even know that there is bad info to be had. They just know that you can't start doxing people without their names. The effort comes as Trump continues to lash out publicly against the whistleblower in ways that seem designed to goad Republican allies into naming the person. Trump has attacked the whistleblower at least 40 times on his Twitter account since the Ukraine scandal broke, including on Friday when he asked, "Where is the whistleblower, and why did he or she write such a fictitious and incorrect account of my phone call with the Ukrainian president?" The line of questioning from the GOP provides the most direct insight to date into the strategy of the president's defenders in closed-door hearings that have produced powerful testimony about the administration's attempt to coerce Ukraine into conducting investigations that Trump hoped would yield damaging information on Democrats, including Joe Biden. You're helpfully reminded that he's seeking the Democratic presidential nomination. The accounts, based on interviews with 10 people involved in the depositions, also underscore the extent to which senior Republicans are directly involved in the impeachment inquiry, even as party leaders claim they are being excluded from it, depicting it as secretive and therefore suspect attack on the president. All right, let's see if we can. I got to take a pause here. Still not clear. Okay, pardon me for the dead air, but I'm sure that was better than listening to what was actually going on here. Dozens of Republican members stormed the secure offices of the House Intelligence Committee on Wednesday, you remember that last week, to protest what they said was their exclusion. All of that being false, as we later found out. In reality, Republican lawmakers and staffers have played a substantial, if subordinate, role since the impeachment inquiry began last month, officials said. Among those chiefly involved are Representative Devin Nunes of California, the senior Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, and Jim Jordan of Ohio, one of Trump's most fervent defenders, and the ranking Republican on the House Oversight Committee. And also the facilitator of a gross number of abuses to his wrestlers at the Ohio State University. But okay. A Republican staffer disputed assertions that Trump allies are seeking to unmask the whistleblower, arguing that those involved in the impeachment inquiry do not know the person's identity but have suspicions. So, of course, they're just going with those. A separate senior GOP aide argued that exploring the political leanings of the whistleblower and others testifying before impeachment investigators is a legitimate line of questioning. It is not, as their political preferences could taint testimony and findings. By the way, I guess here, just to break off and note something separate but similar, I have been astonished at the willingness of members of the political press corps and our punditry, perhaps whatever, but in discussing the booing that went on at the baseball game, I'm incredulous, really, at how easily they move to equate the lock him up chants, for instance, as being evidence that, both sides do it, whereas one was doing it at the Republican National Convention and has done it since at dozens of Trump rallies with the president present versus a random crowd of people at a baseball game. And not even all of them there doing that. I had asked last night, I wasn't even sure if the chant was audible during the television broadcast of the game or whether I had only seen it on video taken on camera, on phone cameras inside the stadium. So I wasn't even sure whether people were able to hear it on television or not. So, that calls into question the idea of whether or not it was embarrassing before the world, as if the world was really watching the World Series, to have had that chant going on. But to equate a national political party's convention, televised convention, with a random happening at a baseball game, without even getting into the justification of whether or not it's a different kind of speech entirely to have that happen at a crowd at a baseball game in the presence of the president who has been using that same line against his enemies. I mean, that's a much better analysis of all of that. But the idea that, I think it was Michael Schmidt, is that right, from the New York Times? One of their chief political reporters now, saying, well, this just goes to show that large swaths of both political parties are into this as an idea, or, this illiberal idea of locking people up without due process. What party was it you were listening to, Michael? Was it the random baseball crowd party? Will you be covering their convention gavel to gavel? No, that's a major national political party, right? People at a baseball game. That was really incredible. All right. Didn't mean to get into that, but I guess I ought to note to myself that I'll want to send you the Schmidt tweet about that baseball analogy. Returning now to the Washington Post's story about how Republicans are using their opportunities in the depositions to try to unmask the whistleblower for some unknown reason. This is an utterly unfair characterization of how Republicans are using their times in depositions and advances erroneous facts to benefit Adam Schiff's partisan effort, the senior GOP official said in a statement referring to Intelligence Committee Chair Schiff, of course. He said Adam Schiff, but okay, in case you don't know who he is. Man, I hate wasting time on those things. Our questions have resulted in the unearthing of material that Democrats want to ignore because they run counter to their impeachment quest. Like what? They won't say. The first Republican official also argued that Democrats have been asking leading questions and that GOP members feel it's important to highlight facts before they believe will be exculpatory for Trump, particularly regarding suggestions that Trump used U.S. aid to Ukraine as an enticement to obtain a political favor, which he did. So you're on solid footing there, guys. As a result, Democrats contend that Republicans are not using the inquiry to uncover facts about the administration's interactions with Ukraine. There's been zero interest among the GOP in actually getting to the conduct of the president, a Democratic lawmaker said. It's not the subject of their questioning at all. That lawmaker and other officials spoke on condition of anonymity, of course. Nunes has used the depositions to try to link those appearing as part of the impeachment inquiry to other individuals who figured prominently in GOP efforts to discredit previous investigations of Trump's ties with Russia in 2016. Witnesses, including former top White House Russia advisor Fiona Hill, have been asked whether they had any interactions with Christopher Steele, the former British intelligence officer. You know him. Republicans have also asked witnesses whether they had contact with Bruce Orr, still hung up on that guy, a former Justice Department official whose wife was affiliated with Fusion GPS, the investigative firm that hired Steele. Hill testified that she knew Steele when both were intelligence officials focused on Russia for their respective governments, but had no connection to Steele's work after he left the British intelligence service. She declined to comment for the story through her attorney, Lee Wolosky. For this story, that is. Nunes has generally taken part in the early rounds of testimony, officials said, before leaving the briefing room and designating Jordan, other GOP members, and a senior Republican aide to handle subsequent questioning of witnesses. The questions about the whistleblower have caught the attention of Democrats who initially explored ways to have the CIA employee testify while shielding the person's identity, and more recently have indicated that they may not be necessary for the person to testify. And I guess it isn't. And I would say here that the complaints about hearsay led to that. You think hearsay is a problem? Fine. We'll just produce other witnesses who were on the call who say the same thing, essentially, and then you will know that the whistleblower heard accurately what people who were actually on the call heard, and you don't need to hear from the whistleblower anymore. And so now Republicans have shifted tactics to, why are you hiding the whistleblower? Whistleblower is no longer necessary, and you want to dox them so badly. If they're not necessary and they can be protected from attack in accordance with the law, then we'll do things that way instead. Attorneys for the whistleblower said any efforts by lawmakers to unmask the individual would be improper. They know about that, of course. The complaint filed by a CIA employee on August 12th, well, you know about the complaint, too. I don't need to fill you in on that. There was the rough transcript of the call released from the White House. That's noted here. A second possible whistleblower has also come forward to bolster the initial complaint. That person's name has also been raised in depositions on Capitol Hill, officials said. The development has created a potential complication for the committee's plans to release transcripts of deposition testimony. Two officials said the committee probably will have to remove personally identifiable information about individuals named by members of Congress and witnesses in those sessions to protect those not appearing before the committee for retaliation or exposure. I'll pause here to note that may very well be a Republican tactic. They name people that they might even name people that they know aren't the whistleblower and accuse them vaguely of possibly being the whistleblower, so that when the committees go to release the transcripts of their proceedings, there have to be redactions in it, and then the Republicans will complain about the redactions and say, what are they hiding? Release the entire transcript. And use that as a basis to undermine the work that was done there. So look out for that tactic too. And I don't know if there's any great way of dealing with that. One former official said the Republicans didn't press much beyond preliminary questions about contacts between witnesses and the suspected whistleblowers. In other words, they asked every witness, do you know any of the names that QAnon have told me are totally involved in this conspiracy? No. Okay. And that's that. A second official said, however, that it's more nefarious than that, and Republican inquiries are persistent and seen as a bid to out those individuals. I offer you that third possibility. All they want is redactions, or all they think they can get out of it is redactions. Though they were probably going for broke. They probably thought they had nailed it and didn't. And the fallback position is, well, at least we'll be able to argue about the redactions later on. In her October 14th testimony, Hill was also asked about the activities and loyalties of a longer list of current or former employees of the National Security Council, including former National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster. Republicans seem to be trying to tie him to suspected efforts to undermine Trump by former Obama administration officials who remained in their White House assignments during Trump's early months in office, officials said. The questions appeared driven, at least in part, by Derek Harvey. New name to introduce here. Could be a Friday show thing. Derek Harvey, a senior advisor to Nunes, who worked on the National Security Council early in the Trump presidency before being removed by McMaster amid allegations that Harvey was compiling lists of suspected disloyal colleagues. So, tossed out on his ear. Harvey, a former U.S. Army officer and Middle East expert, was passing notes the entire time Hill was being questioned, feeding questions to Republicans, a former official said, although that's not improper. That's what they're supposed to be doing. Nunes' office did not respond to requests for comment. The committee has divided rounds of questioning into 30 or 45-minute blocks, officials said, in which Democrats and Republicans take turns. Loyalty to Trump has been the focus of the GOP segments, officials said. Yovanovitch was asked point blank whether she had ever spoken disparagingly about Trump while serving in Kiev or had sought to undermine his policies, a veiled charge that she vehemently denied, officials said. Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, has said in interviews that he lobbied Trump to have Yovanovitch removed because she was acting against the president. And she was acting in furtherance of what was supposed to be official U.S. policy toward Ukraine. The problem is the president and all of his people were undermining what was publicly announced as the official policy, and Yovanovitch saw it and wanted to put a stop to it and didn't automatically get out of the guy's way because he was supposedly president of the United States. Anyway, at the time, Yovanovitch was seeking to contain efforts by Giuliani to bypass normal diplomatic channels in his efforts to persuade government officials. You know what he was trying to do, but reminder of who was doing it and how. Republicans have also spent their time in depositions seeking to advance Trump's unsubstantiated claims that Ukraine and not Russia interfered in the elections. During several depositions, Republicans touted a Politico article from 2017 that indicated that Ukrainian officials worked with the Clinton campaign to expose the activities of Paul Manafort, who served as Trump's campaign chair. Disclosures of secret cash payments to Manafort forced him to resign from the Trump campaign. He's, of course, serving a 7-year prison sentence as a result of all of that. Taylor, the acting ambassador to Ukraine, was asked repeatedly during his testimony about material in that Politico article. He indicated that he was not familiar with its contents, but stressed that he would consider any foreign interference in U.S. elections problematic. Taylor's testimony described a concerted campaign by Trump to pressure Ukraine. We heard all about that. Upon learning of the scheme while serving in Kiev, Taylor texted other diplomats that he thought it was crazy to withhold security assistance for help with the political campaign. We were also aware of that. I think that is largely it. There's a little bit more here, but how to use the rest of the time. There's two things. I guess one I'll hold for later on in the week. Maybe that also will be Friday. More about Derek Harvey and what he's been up to. I think the Daily Beast has got some interesting information on him and what he's been doing, including one of his former jobs, by the way, working for Mike Flynn. So worked for both Mike Flynn and Devin Nunes, two of the more notorious spies embedded in the American government in the last couple of years. Imagine being a chief aide to two spies and still thinking like you could come out smelling like a rose in all of this. All right. The other thing I guess that I will spend the closing moments of the show on is what was coming up Thursday. What I thought was happening Thursday was the testimony, but what's actually happening on Thursday and why Thursday is in mind is Thursday is the day that the House Democrats will move to the floor with a resolution outlining the rules and procedures for the impeachment inquiry going forward. And that has caused some consternation as well, and perhaps needlessly so. The Republicans have latched on to what Nancy Pelosi offered up by way of recommendation for the resolution. She put out a Dear Colleague letter, which is a standard practice, when you've introduced legislation that's about to be moved in committee or on the floor, and you can write to all of your colleagues and give them your best reasons for supporting it and ask for their support. She put out a letter describing what was going on, but I think doing more work than it really needed to, and tying the resolution to White House complaints about the process in ways that weren't necessarily accurate and probably were a misstep. CNN reported on Pelosi's Dear Colleague letter here, saying she sent on Monday this thing about this resolution, which is coming up on Thursday. The letter says Dear Democratic colleague, for weeks, the President, his counsel in the White House, and his allies in Congress have made the baseless claim that the House of Representatives impeachment inquiry, quote, lacks the necessary authorization for a valid impeachment hearing. They argue that because the House has not taken a vote, they may simply pretend the impeachment inquiry does not exist. Of course, this argument has no merit. The Constitution provides that the House of Representatives, quote, shall have the sole power of impeachment, unquote. Multiple past impeachments have gone forward without any authorizing resolutions. Just last week, a federal court confirmed that the House is not required to hold a vote, and that imposing such a requirement would be an impermissible intrusion on the House's constitutional authority, which is what we've argued all along. So no surprise there, though I'm sure. Well, they've already said they're going to appeal that. More than 300 legal scholars have also refuted this argument, concluding that the Constitution does not mandate the process for impeachment, and there is no constitutional requirement that the House of Representatives authorize an impeachment inquiry before one begins. The Trump administration has made up this argument, apparently out of whole cloth, in order to justify its unprecedented cover-up, withhold key documents from multiple federal agencies, prevent critical witnesses from cooperating, and defy duly authorized subpoenas. This week, we will bring a resolution to the floor that affirms the ongoing existing investigation that is currently being conducted by our committees as part of this impeachment inquiry, including all requests for documents, subpoenas for records and testimony, and any other investigative steps previously taken or to be taken as part of this investigation. The resolution establishes the procedure for hearings that are open to the American people, authorizes the disclosure of deposition transcripts, a problem that we discussed earlier, outlines procedures to transfer evidence to the Judiciary Committee as it considers potential articles of impeachment, and sets forth due process rights for the President and his counsel, another big White House complaint, right? We are taking this step to eliminate any doubt as to whether the Trump administration may withhold documents, prevent witness testimony, disregard duly authorized subpoenas, or continue obstructing the House of Representatives. Nobody is above the law. Best regards, Nancy. So, it didn't help. The Republicans immediately said that all the same problems existed anyway, and that you can't go back and do this, or even suggested that all things that have been undertaken to date are invalid until this vote takes place. What I think she probably should have said instead was, you should ignore all of the White House protestations about this because they are invalid and have nothing to do with what we're offering here, which is in fact a roadmap, an internal roadmap going forward for how will we proceed with closing out the closed depositions process. How are we going to get those transcripts out there? How are we going to use them in an impeachment inquiry going forward? And who will be taking the lead and under what rules? That's all the resolution really has to do. And that's all it should do. And that's all we should say it does. All the protests from the White House about due process, etc., should be ignored because they were invalid before. They're invalid now. And this resolution likely does nothing to change the fact that they were invalid, and does nothing to validate them going forward in the future either. All this is an internal roadmap, though it may have some other discussion included in there that attempts to brush aside all of the White House's complaints, but they really shouldn't have troubled themselves with them because, as she says, the court said they were all without merit. So I guess she thought that it might be another one of those opportunities to say, fine, you say you want to vote, here's the vote you were asking for. Republicans are saying this isn't the vote we were asking for, it's something different. And it is, but that's also okay because the vote they were asking for is an invalid one, never was necessary, and we don't acknowledge that it is necessary. And neither does this resolution. They should have left it at that, but whatever, they didn't. It won't make any material difference. I just wanted you to know that, and maybe we'll read, or perhaps I'll read offline, the contents, the actual language of the resolution, just to be sure of what it says. But all indications are that all it is setting ground rules for who's going to be holding the hearings going forward, what the chief aim of their proceedings is going to be. That is, that the Judiciary Committee will now take over to consider whether or not to draft actual articles of impeachment. The only vote that matters constitutionally that would be required of the House is the adoption of articles of impeachment. How they get there is of no concern to anyone but the House. That's what the ruling from the judge said. Yes, they're appealing it to the D.C. Circuit. In all likelihood, the D.C. Circuit will leave it alone. They will then appeal it to the Supreme Court, and at that point you will find out whether or not 5 conservative justices will band together to teach you that everything you ever learned about civics and the law is wrong starting now, and the only thing that matters in the Constitution is service to Trump going forward. So if that happens, well, then you're out of luck. Okay, let's wrap it up. Time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for his program next. Let's see what we can cram in about what he's got on tap for you after this. Let's see. Trump looks like Trump's yes men, he says, failed to tell him the details of the counterterrorism operations don't need to be revealed. Whoops, I guess he did that as well.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
The Trump administration overturned a Civil War-era law the Obama administration used to build bad lending cases against the big banks. A Virginia GOP lawmaker says stay-at-home moms caring for a child born with major medical conditions, like his Democratic opponent, aren't really working day to day. That seems nice, and much more.